Hello everyone. Today I'm going to tell you about one of the true wonders of the world, a place lost in the tropical forest of Cambodia that once was the capital of a large empire, and without a doubt the most atmospheric sight I have seen in my life. A place full of mysteries, the city of Angkor. So please sit down comfortably or lie down, because our journey is starting right now. We will talk about the history of Angkor and visit some of the most remarkable temples and ruins that can be found on this gigantic site in the heart of the forest. Angkor is a massive archaeological site, maybe the largest in the world, on more than 1,000 kilometers square in Cambodia, and it served as the capital city of the Khmer Empire between the 9th and 15th centuries, before this empire collapsed and disappeared. In the pre-industrial era, Angkor was maybe the largest urban area in the world, made of hundreds of temples, palaces, canals, that made it possible to sustain a city of close to 1 million inhabitants at a time when in Europe, in the Americas, and even in the Middle East, cities were much smaller. And the Khmers are the traditional inhabitants of Cambodia. They arrived in Cambodia millenniums ago. They converted to Hinduism and Buddhism, depending on the periods, and from the 9th to the 13th centuries their kingdom expanded around what is Cambodia today, to parts of Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, even Burma and Malaysia. And for most of that period, Angkor was their capital in a fairly hostile region. The land is fertile, but there is an alternation of floods and droughts, making it difficult to sustainably maintain large populations. But they managed to do so thanks to their ingenuity by building canals and artificial lakes, artificial tanks, where they could keep the water and use it to their advantage. The wonder of Angkor is not only in the architectural achievement, the beauty and the greatness of the temples we are going to visit. It is also in this capacity of the Khmers to domesticate the environment and repel the forest to build this gigantic capital. The site had been populated by man long before Angkor was built, probably as early as the second millennium before Christ, but it is only in the 9th century that the first works of hydraulic development were ordered by one of the first emperors of the Khmers, a king called Indravarman, and he also built the first temple that still can be seen on the site, a temple called the Pre-Ko, which was built at the end of the 9th century and made of bricks like all the early buildings in Angkor. This would be the starting point of 3 centuries of architectural greatness on this site, and the Pre-Ko, which, like all the earliest temples, has particularly refined engravings. The bas-reliefs that decorate the temple are extraordinarily detailed and precious. This temple would be quickly followed a few years later by the first mountain temple, which was typical of the Hinduist cult. In the last centuries of the first millennium, the Khmers were highly influenced by Indian culture and the religion, and Hinduism was the dominating religion in that region. It would change later, but from Hinduism, because it corresponds to the Hinduist cosmology, they inherited this practice of building mountain temples that symbolize Mount Meru, which, according to Hinduism, is the place where the gods live and also the axis of the world. There would be many more mountain temples built later in Angkor, and especially the magnificent Angkor Wat, which is one of the symbols of Angkor. The followers of Indravarman in this city that started to become larger built the first stone temples in the 10th century. At the beginning of the 11th century, there was a period of trouble during which the capital of the Khmer kingdom was moved to another Khmer city, Kokher. But a few decades later, in the 11th century, it came back to Angkor, and the development of the site took new dimensions with the creation of gigantic ponds, especially the western Barai. Is the name given to these artificial lakes, artificial ponds that served as reserves of water, and the building of the first giant temples, such as the Bafuan, a giant pyramid with sides of about 150 meters, with several walls around, and made of 300,000 pieces of stone, each half a ton heavy. Everything was sculpted, decorated, and each of these stones were unique. The temple was modified later because it had been dedicated to Shiva initially, and when the Khmer emperors became Buddhists at a later stage, the temple was modified to receive a giant statue of Buddha. In the 12th century, the temple of Angkor Wat, which is the largest on the site and one of the largest religious buildings in the entire world, was built, and it was initially an Hinduist temple dedicated to Vishnu, later turned into a Buddhist temple, and the size and deep harmony created by this architecture are really mind-boggling. This is at the same time an extremely simple shape, like a mountain rising towards the sky, but also, if you look at it from close, an extremely complex and elaborate building with galleries, with an abundance of corners, of smaller buildings, of decorations. There are hundreds of statues and engravings on the wall in this temple alone, and for that reason it has been called one of the wonders of the world, and today is the symbol of Cambodia. The following 2 centuries would see an alternation of Hinduism and Buddhism in Angkor, each time leading to changes to oldest temples, but many more wonders would be built, like Angkor Thom, which is not one building but almost like a city within the city, with walls and more temples inside, like the Bayon, one of the most famous temples of Angkor too, with giant Buddha heads that are included in the building. And this architecture, when you cross massive doors with faces of Buddha and arrive in front of a mountain of stone with a perfect symmetry, but with an extremely intricate and detailed architecture, with these giant faces looking in every direction, gives you the impression that you are really in another world. Another large temple of the same period is Ta Prohm, which is famous because it has been maintained in the state it was when it was rediscovered by archaeologists, with trees and plants that have grown out of the walls and are now merged with the ruins. And the Ta Prohm temple is fabulous for its atmospheric quality. This is really a place that gives you the impression you are entering a sanctuary of nature when you see the roots of the trees coming out of the windows or between the stones, and this gives you a sense of how in awe the travelers and explorers who rediscovered Angkor probably were, because after the 14th century the Khmer Empire declined. It suffered especially from the rise of the kingdom of Ayutthaya, which is an ancient Thai kingdom, disappeared in the 18th century, but that contributed to militarily defeat the Khmers that had to abandon their capital. And another likely reason for the abandon of Angkor is that the Khmers had lost control of the water, maybe due to particularly strong droughts. It became impossible to maintain such a large population on this giant urban area, even if it was of relatively low density. It was becoming impossible to feed such a large population. And from the 15th century, Angkor was progressively abandoned. It was never entirely forgotten by the Khmers, and the temple of Angkor Wat in particular remained occupied, but most of the surface of the site was not maintained anymore, so that the forest, bit by bit, like for the Mayan cities in Mexico, the forest invaded the temples, the buildings, and progressively covered them so much that most of Angkor disappeared under the tropical forest. In the 16th century, the first European travelers, they were Portuguese, reached Angkor and were highly impressed by what they saw, even though that was just a tiny part of Angkor's ancient beauty. But the real rediscovery of Angkor took place in the 19th century, and was made mainly by French archaeologists, because in that period France was in the process of colonizing this region. It had arrived in Cambodia, helping Cambodia to resist the powerful neighbor that Siam, Thailand, was, and the king of Cambodia had to call France to find protection against the Thais, which the French used as a good occasion to force a protectorate on the country and start its exploitation. This permitted French explorers to explore the ruins of Angkor and suddenly realize how gigantic, precious this lost city could be. They rediscovered temples that had been covered by the forest for sometimes 4 or 5 centuries, and started the first works of reconstruction on some of them, deciding sometimes, like for Taprom that I mentioned earlier, to let nature on the site to preserve this picturesque appearance of Angkor that it had when it was discovered. The site of Angkor gained a massive popularity in the last years of the 19th century and in the 20th century. For example, there was a colonial exposition in Paris in the 1930s, where the main point of interest was a reproduction of the Angkor Wat temple, and this is the moment when it became a symbol of Angkor. The exploration, the research on the site continued after the independence of Cambodia in the 1950s, but was unfortunately interrupted for several years, starting in the 1970s due to the Khmer Rouge regime and the civil war that happened in Cambodia at that time. This is a terrible page of history for this country. It is estimated that about a fourth of the population was killed or died during these years of cruel and completely crazy dictatorship, especially the minorities, but all the inhabitants of Cambodia suffered from that period. And only recently, since the 1990s, tourism has started to take off in Cambodia, and the economy as well. Hopefully that will continue, making Angkor a fastly growing tourist destination, which is an excellent thing. Of course, tourism is always a threat to archaeological sites, but Cambodia needs it, and this wonderful site deserves to be known for its incredible beauty, for as usual, I hope this little trip was pleasant. I thank you for all your comments, messages. I really appreciate them. And I'll see you soon for another story.